difficulties. I do appreciate everyone joining us. Good afternoon. If you're on one of our previous meetup sessions, we're glad that you've come back. However, if this is your first Florida Consortium online meetup, a warm welcome to everyone out there. We're glad you are here. My name is Michael Preston. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Consortium of Metropolitan Research Universities. For those of you who don't know us, the Florida Consortium is a partnership between Florida International University, Florida University of Central Florida, and the University of South Florida. For the past 5 weeks, we've been meeting online to discuss how to best support emergency remote instruction, student engagement, career readiness, and the realities of COVID-19 as it relates to education. And by the way, I went today to get my first COVID-19 test, so let's see how that comes out. I encourage everybody to do so if you get an opportunity to. I'd like to thank the Helios Education Foundation for their support and all of our collaborative work, which includes this series. Throughout today's session, please post questions in the comments of the chat. I am excited about today's co-presenters, Cynthia L. Alvarez, Assistant Director of Student Success at California State University and Chancellor in the Office of the Chancellor, and Mitzy Gonzalez, University Innovation Alliance Fellow and Assistant Director, Center for the Higher Education Innovation at the University of Central Florida. I'm going to toss it over to them for some introductions, but I do ask that you bear in mind that we've had a couple of technical difficulties, so if it pops in or out, don't worry, we can hear the same things that you can, and we're working very hard to make sure that everybody gets a clear channel. Thank you. Take it away, Cynthia and Mitzy.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mitzy Gonzalez. Can you all hear me okay? Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay,
we sure
perfect.
can.
Just wanted to check. All right, so my name is Mitzy Gonzalez. Thank you, Michael, for the opportunity to join you all virtually in the webinar. Unfortunately, my camera's not working, so you won't be able to see me, but hopefully you can hear me okay. I am, as Michael mentioned, the University Innovation Alliance Fellow at the University of Central Florida. I've been in my role since September 2018 and have been serving as a program manager for our Chatbot pilot project here at UCF in the Office of Student Financial Assistance, which we started our process exploring chatbots in January of 2019. So Cynthia and I both served as UIA fellows at one point together, and we have a lot of learnings and lessons that we want to share out with you all today. So I'll hand it over to Cynthia if she's able to join.
Hi, hello. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Dr. Cynthia Alvarez. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Success at the California State University Office of the Chancellor, as Mitzy mentioned, former UIA fellows along with her, and now speaking about the importance of having a student-centered, first-generation student-centered applications of a very popular tool at the moment, which are the chatbots. I identify as a first-generation college student from a working class background, and so the ability to have a tool like this, I know would have been really, really important and impactful for me as a student when I was an undergrad. So today we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what it means to center these students, first generation and transfer students, when thinking about a bot to launch on your campus. And so I'm going through the slides. Hopefully you can see them. The learning objectives for this presentation are: 1, to define the chatbot's purpose and impact in higher education, and of course, with first generation and transfer student needs in mind. 2nd, to understand the chatbot exploration and design process that serves with intentionality with first gen and transfer students. And the 3rd, of course, to provide strategies for you to be able to build a campus team and engage with chatbot vendors in a way that positions a chatbot project with as much possible success, as possible. And so if you can see, today's presentation will primarily focus on the phases of the process that we see here. These are 5 different stages that we've identified in terms of a successful chatbot deployment. The first 2 that we'll be focusing on will be the explore and design processes, which are really, really important for you to have a solid foundation for a campus chatbot team.
Thank you, Cynthia. I realized that my mic was muted. So thank you for sharing that. And I do want to preface that all of these steps are extremely important, but it's especially important to really invest time in these first phases of the chatbot deployment in order to have more success later on. And I want to start off before we dive into chatbots and really explaining more about what they are and what they can do for you and your students, that I would encourage everyone to internally ask themselves if the process we're asking a student to navigate in the first place is broken itself. Because if the answer is yes, then the chatbot solution may not be the best answer to that. Process mapping could be a great tool for identifying if there are other areas that you may need to solve within your organization. So I just want to again emphasize, don't just lean on the chatbot technology as a solution to help students navigate an already complex process. I know that at UCF, we've engaged in several process mapping initiatives to help identify certain barriers that get in the student's way within our own processes. So that's just something I want to emphasize, that the chatbot solution could actually add more confusion to the process if it's not implemented correctly. And next slide. So you've likely been hearing or seeing the term chatbots all over higher education, especially over the last several years. It's not a new solution at all. You know, in terms of other businesses and organizations have been utilizing chatbots to an extent for many years. You're likely more familiar with it, you know, on your banking websites and things like that. Before I dive into the different forms of chatbots, I just wanted to give a quick summary of what is a chatbot. Chatbots are short for chat robot, and it is a computer program that simulates human conversations. It allows for an interaction between a human and a machine. There are varying levels of sophistication of a bot. You'll likely hear the terms artificial intelligence, machine learning, and oftentimes what we're seeing in higher education is a chatbot in its basic form, which is really just utilizing a knowledge base to answer basic FAQs and sharing that back with the student. There are many different forms of chatbots in terms of channels. You'll hear that word. There's SMS text channel, there's online web-based format, there's Facebook, and also voice, for example, like Alexa or Siri. And while the chatbots are programmed to work independently from a human, later on in our presentation, we're going to highlight the need for human support, because it's not a silver bullet, and the tool, although will help your institution greatly, you're still going to need human capital and human support to make it work and operate as successfully as you'd like it to. So I guess at this point, I'd love to hear from our audience a little bit. I know we won't be able to hear from you via voice, but if you could in the chat box, please share whether you currently have a bot on your campus, and then if you do, where within your campus do you have that bot? And then if you don't have a bot currently, are you in the process of exploring whether this is the right solution for a problem on your campus? So feel free to put your responses in the chat. Do you currently have a bot on your campus? If so, where? Or are you in the process of exploring whether this is the right solution? So I'll give you all a few moments to type in your responses in the chat box, and Cynthia and I will be monitoring those as we continue our presentation, but we just want to have a good gauge and pulse of where our audience is at in the process. So you can advance to the next slide, please.
All right, can you see this okay?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So as Mitzy mentioned, a tool like a chatbot is really hot right now, especially in the time of COVID-19, when all of our institutions are facing really incredible pressures to move a good chunk of our materials, of our services to a virtual form. And so the discussion that we really want to have today is, how do we mindfully leverage educational tools like a chatbot to help our first generation and transfer undergraduate students navigate these complex systems, right? So again, understanding that this is just one tool that can be used to help students make sense of what is going on, what they need to do, what the actions they need to take in order to be successful at your institution. And again, with COVID-19, if you can imagine being a first generation student, an entering transfer student who's having to learn the institution for the first time, and maybe there isn't that one-to-one personal in-person touch. How can we use this to replicate, or at least give a semblance of that interaction that is so appreciated and so needed by first generation and transfer students? And so the first step for doing that and making sure that you successfully launch a chatbot project is to identify purpose and identify the goal of your chatbot. As Mitzy mentioned, the chatbot is really great for a variety of reasons, and there's so many different ways that the tool can take shape and form, right? We mentioned a Facebook option, there's a text/SMS, there's a web-based, but once you figure out what kind you want, then you have to figure out, what is it going to be used for? What is this tool for? And so for us, one way that it's really useful is to increase student knowledge and awareness of a particular topic, to which the result is the removal of a barrier for first generation and transfer student success. So an example of these could be financial aid deadlines, fee deadlines, information having to do with how to select your classes, what to look out for. These are, the chatbot can be a tool to make sure that the process for navigating the institution is a little bit more demystified. In addition, a chatbot is very handy for supporting that navigation, right? As we've mentioned with first-gen students. It's really helpful, if done the right way, in developing an accessible and non-threatening information pathway in order to maximize opportunities and resources offered by your campus, right? And so it's important to keep in mind that this tool serves as a way to help drive students to take a specific action, which is, again, with COVID-19 and with everything going virtual, is so important in making sure that the resources that already exist on your campus are being, students are being made aware of them, and they're taking the action to use those resources, and therefore have a more successful and positive experience on your campus.
And as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, UCF is in the process of piloting a chatbot in our Office of Student Financial Assistance. And we started our exploration process back in January of 2019. And in that exploration process, we gathered a team of individuals together to really identify, one, do we want a chatbot on our campus? Is it the right solution? But first, what problems are we trying to identify? And so I think, as we gather our problem statements and explore that, we needed both qualitative and quantitative data for that. And so after we really looked at our data, specifically within the Office of Student Financial Assistance, in terms of wait times that students were having, especially during our peak periods, and I'm sure many of you can relate, sometimes students were having to wait up to 2 hours to talk to a financial aid counselor during peak periods. And our students are very savvy. So what they'll do is they'll wait in line to talk to a face-to-face to a counselor. Then they'll be on their phones writing an email at the same time while they're on hold on the phone trying to talk to a counselor because they want their responses. And we have identified that was a barrier in terms of our students progressing, and it could be a potential barrier in students progressing in the financial aid process. So we identified that data, our average wait times, our full-time employee staff numbers compared to our student volume, our student size at our institution. And with that data, it was really helpful for our team to get on the same page. Okay, financial aid is the right place for us to start, but also having that data and equipping us with that as we engaged with our vendors and during demonstrations was very helpful in helping them understand our institution, our context, and also the students we serve. So just really wanting to emphasize that as you engage in this, making sure that you all have the right materials and knowledge on hand. So in times of COVID-19, a chatbot really has a greater potential to help your campus teams and students, specifically around consistent messaging. Since you have control over the knowledge base and what the chatbot ultimately responds to the questions students or family members or individuals pose, it allows you to provide consistent messaging to your audience. In times of confusion, especially with COVID-19, this is a helpful tool to ensure you can easily update to reflect your current reality. I know at UCF we had a coronavirus website that was constantly being updated. So what we chose to do, we added questions around COVID-19 to our knowledge base, but just continued to direct students back to that website because we knew that that was being updated and maintained and going to provide students with the most up-to-date, accurate information. So I think what's important with the chatbot is you can avoid the telephone game and the message potentially being altered slightly from person to person. So that's a really great way for chatbots to help you and your institution. Another way is it speeds up delivery of services for busy offices. At UCF, we saw a significant increase in individuals interacting with our web-based bot on our student financial assistance website. Once we went into quarantine and COVID-19. I don't have the exact numbers on me, but we know we saw at least a 200% increase in engagement on our website because of that. And just some of the main questions that I think a lot of students, at least in financial aid, were asking our chatbot centered around refunds for tuition and housing, CARES Act money, graduation ceremonies, plans to return back to campus for summer and fall, and the grading policy and its impact on financial aid or scholarships. So I think that was really helpful information to have, that we're seeing, okay, these are the questions that students are asking on the phone still to counselors, but also we're seeing that same reflected in our knowledge base and in the data. So it allows us to be thoughtful in terms of maybe there are potential nudge campaigns that we can send out around specific questions that we're getting to help students. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you all potentially adopt a chatbot during this time. And so again, in the chatbot, we'd love to hear from you, chatbox, we'd love to hear from you. What are some of the issues that you are attempting to address with a chatbot? I'm not sure if I can't see any responses on my end, but please engage with us. We'd love to hear from you. So if you could think of maybe some issues that you're currently addressing with your chatbot or you would like to address with your chatbot, we'd love to hear from you.
I can also run the poll, and that might be a way for people to chime in.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, I'll run it. I'll run the poll.
And could you share with us the results of the poll?
Sure. It'll just take a minute or two for people to sort of chime in, and we're seeing some responses coming in ever so quickly. Just we'll give it a few more minutes.
Thank you.
Or moments, not really minutes. We're about 47% folks have chimed in. We'll just give it another second or two to cross over.
Of course, this being a technology-focused webinar, this is our first try at a poll on one of our.
Well, I appreciate keeping on theme. I think that's fantastic.
I will close it right as we're at about 60%. And to this poll question, about 53% of the people have chimed in yes, that they are currently exploring a bot on their campus.
Great.
Fantastic.
Well, we hope that this material that we're sharing with you all today will help, and just know that Cynthia and myself are happy to, towards the end, answer any of your questions that you may have specific to your process, that the part of the process that you're in right now. So please keep your questions on hand, and we'd love to hear from you towards the end of the presentation. But in terms of the other questions you should be asking, one is obviously what is the issue that you're attempting to address, but always centering that back again to your students. What do your students need? And what are they vocalizing to your staff and to your university of the things that they need? But also just based on experiences that they're having, what may they not be vocalizing just yet, but that they may need in the future. So empathy and student connection should always be at the center of your exploration and design process. The way we connect with our students needs to stay flexible and creative, especially as we brainstorm and ideate around solutions to best support them. I think it's really important that we don't only rely on students completing surveys to get their feedback on their needs and experiences, but instead really relying on our experts on our campuses. I noted, that oftentimes in the meetings I'm in, frontline staff members are, included in the exploration process, but then once things are being implemented, that the makeup of the teams or projects may change. I'd recommend meaningfully including frontline service staff members in every phase, because they oftentimes have the highest touch points with your first generation and transfer students, and have an established rapport with those students that result in gleaning more specific challenges or needs that students may share. Gathering feedback at important times in a student's journey, maybe even doing a journey map alongside of students to identify maybe some opportunity points could be a helpful activity. And something that Cynthia did, which I thought at UCF we're going to potentially explore, is opening an open source document for student leaders to add continuously in terms of opportunities that they see at the institution could help solve for. And again, Chatbot may not be the best solution for each of those needs or problems that arise, but it's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit about that open source document. One thing that I found while I was working at UC Riverside, which is where I was a UI fellow and was developing the Chatbot, was that I knew that student leaders were just chomping at the bit in terms of wanting to make a change, to take action on their campuses, to create a better environment for their peers. And so what I did is that I connected with student leaders across the campus, and I asked them for their help to gather feedback from their peers. And so they became like my liaisons for the majority of the campus. And that was amazing, because I kept the document as an open source document throughout a couple of quarters, and they were able to add in questions that they had in real time. And what was really interesting is that I began to see a shift of topics depending on the year, depending on the time of the year, right? And so for any of you in our audience right now who are academic advisors or peer mentors, and have high contact with students, you know that the questions that students ask in the middle of the term are very different from the questions that they ask at the end of the term, or even at the beginning, maybe even summer. And so again, going back to what's useful with a chatbot is that you start to see not only what kinds of questions students have, but you also have the opportunity to start seeing if there are any trends so that in the future, you are able to hopefully, with the collaboration of your colleagues across the campus, are able to collaborate on preemptive marketing strategies or preemptive resource sharing that can then help your students navigate the university with a little bit more ease. But I feel like we've gotten a little bit off side, but I think this is a really good topic to talk about and incredibly important. But we'll get back on track and we'll talk about the key pieces that you need to consider when you're building your campus core team, right? And that, of course, is aligning needs, purpose, and audience. So a question again for the audience is, which campus stakeholders should you involve and at what time in the process? We also ask you to consider what perspectives, interests, priorities, and concerns will they bring as it relates to the chatbot. And so for us, this is a really important question to ask because, again, if you want to create something, right, create a tool that is helpful for your students that is intentional, right? That's the operating word today. If it is intentional to serve the needs of your first generation and transfer students, then you have to have people in your campus team, in your core team, that understand the experiences of these students at your campus, right? It's incredibly important, as Mitzy mentioned a few minutes ago, that you include them through the entire process of developing the chatbot, not just at the beginning, not just at the end to check offs and said, yep, we checked with this one particular office and they said it was great, right? Intentionality requires inclusivity, and it requires that you are very thoughtful and mindful on who's going to have a seat at the table and who's going to help you shape this tool that is going to be incredibly helpful for your students. And so for the answers to the questions, if you could continue to engage with the chat, that would be really, really great.
Wonderful. So the question I think that we continue to ask ourselves throughout our exploration design process and even to this day at UCF is, do we have the right people involved in the conversations? And this is particularly important to ask yourselves during the vendor demonstrations, when you're meeting and learning more about from different vendors about the solutions that they're able to offer. And I think it's important to ask yourself the follow-up question to that. Who are we missing? And as a result, what challenges and opportunities are we not identifying? At UCF, we were intentional with identifying key stakeholders from a variety of areas across campus, and this proved really advantageous for us throughout the exploration phase. Hindsight, I would have wanted to include, honestly, more students during this phase and someone from procurement and IT information security. We included them later on in the conversation, but I think sometimes vendors will make promises that ultimately they'll never be able to work for your campus. But if the right people from your campus community are involved, they can help identify those blind spots that you may just have because, for example, I don't have an IT background. When vendors were sharing some of that information, I relied heavily on our CIO and others on our campus to say that's not going to work here or that could work here, but these are the potential barriers we may see. So engaging your stakeholders, who's at the table, who's not at the table, just as important to be thinking about. And to acknowledge that participation by each team member will likely vary throughout each stage. For example, at UCF, our team looked very differently last year to how it looks today, because during the exploration and design process, we needed more people from procurement to be involved. We needed more people from IT to be involved in that. Whereas today, I can follow up with them and update them on the status of the chatbot project, but they don't need to be as heavily involved in our monthly meetings where we're talking about the knowledge base and refining the knowledge base and things like that. So this is Cynthia, you good?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, okay, sorry. But so the other aspect you wanted to make sure that in terms of when you're getting ready in the design process is do you have an identified project manager? I think both Cynthia and I, when we were working on the Chatbot project, one is we were, as the fellow, we are meant to help build capacity at our institutions. And so we naturally took on that role. But I think as you and your team are designing your team and the makeup of it, identifying a specific person who has some technological understanding, but also that can communicate to non-tech stakeholders in a way that's approachable and accessible is very important, and who can help manage and organize everything. So that's one thing. And as I mentioned earlier, is starting that communication early on with IT, procurement, and general counsel. A lot of these documents, especially once you're securing the vendor, are going to be going through different forms, and our general counsel, I developed great relationships with them later on that if I would have thought maybe a little more proactively, could have developed those earlier. So just in summary, invest in building your team. It's an important phase that should not be looked over. And as the bot grows, which I mentioned earlier, you're likely going to need more dedicated staff to focus on the chatbot. So at the beginning, maybe one project manager is suffice, but as you move on, and especially as you expand to other departments, you may need an identified project manager for each department who is committing to helping refine the knowledge base. I know at several other institutions within the UIA, they have specific people who their whole job is centered around chatbots. We may not have the luxury of doing that. UCF, we do not have the luxury of having one person committed fully to chatbots, but we have great relationships that we've built within financial aid and across other departments. We have an identified faculty member who's helping us with the evaluation piece. That's been a great asset. So, you know, you have to manage with the resources that you currently have available, but if you have a surplus of resources, I would definitely say invest in developing a specific chatbot team where their full focus can be around chatbots. But if not, you can still make it work, just understanding and making sure that you dedicate time to helping your bot grow.
Yeah, and additional advice for the making it work side of our audience is that, you know, sometimes what is needed for the chatbot is stuff that you've already created. If you think about your offices, you may already have an FAQ page. You may already have other resources that have the content. And so it's just a matter of repurposing, a matter of realigning so that it's usable for the chatbot project. But again, if you also don't have the capability to have a dedicated person per department or per office, which is incredibly understandable, a liaison, right? Having just a person that can connect you to the different folks in a particular office or a particular department. And I think that even though it's a making it work type of moment, it actually does go a long way in building community, in building buy-in and ownership of a project that can be shared by so many different offices in service of your first generation and transfer students. And so we'll be moving on to thinking through what are the pieces to keep in mind as you're trying to find the right fit with your vendors. So a few tips before contacting your vendors. You want to make sure that you know if there are any existing chatbots on your campus, right? Don't want to be creating or recreating, restarting a whole process that may have already lived. And it may be the case that if you're interested in having a chatbot on your particular department where it doesn't exist as of yet, you can reach out to the office or the department that has an existing contract and see, you know, can it be extended? Is there an opportunity for a license for the entire institution, right? So check that out first. Again, we're about streamlining your efforts, you know, in times of COVID-19 and with limited resources that we may have and limited time and capacity. I think making sure that you know what other conversations around Chatbot are going on is just incredibly important. Second is to define a timeline for your rollout, right? Are you going to have a soft rollout before the official launch? I know we get really excited about getting this, this type of tool out there for our students, but think strategically, think in the long run. Is it best to have a soft rollout where you test the bot with maybe 1,000 students just to see that you're getting everything right, the answers are coming through correctly, that students are starting to build a little bit of trust with your bot? And if that's the case, then it sets you up really well for an official campus launch, right? And of course, with technology, as we've experienced today, you have to remain flexible. There are things that will come up, as you know, with any kind of project that, just puts a slight little dent in your original timeline. And so again, with anything that has to do with technology, working with different vendors, situations are fluid, you have to remain flexible. In addition, before contacting vendors, develop a list of must-haves and would be nice for your ideal chatbot. If you've been to any presentation from a chatbot vendor, sometimes they're super shiny and they're great and they have nice little videos and cute robots or cute bots on the screen, and it's awesome. But you have to remain mindful again of what your purpose is for this chatbot, what issue you are trying to solve, and what are the necessary things that you need to have in this chatbot in order to tackle those first 2 points. And so it's like shopping, right? You go into Target for one thing and then you come out with 100 other things that you really shouldn't have bought, right? It's the same thing. Keep your eyes on the prize and make sure that what you truly need is what you're getting. Tied to that is understanding your budget for the short term and the long term. Some of the chatbot vendors will offer multi-year contracts. If that's the case, what's the longevity? What's the strategy around building your chatbot for a long term? It does take a lot of work to get a project like this going. And so you want to be mindful, what is this going to look like in a year, in 2 years, maybe 3 years? Who are the players, right? When we go back to building our stakeholder groups, who's going to be part of the team? Is it going to evolve from year 1 to year 2? What does that look like? So make sure you start thinking about that. And of course, talking to peer institutions who have chatbots and asking them about their own experiences with their vendor is also really important, right? Just like anything, when you are shopping for a car, for example, you want to know, maybe you look on YouTube and look up reviews, right? You want to understand, what has the customer service experience been like? Did vendors make a promise for something at the beginning and then they weren't able to fulfill it at the end? You want to be as informed of a customer, of a shopper, right, as you possibly can.
And I'll add to that. I think it's those relationships and connections you form before you even engage with vendors can help you once you've already selected your vendor as well. For example, at UCF, when we were about to launch our chatbot, we had some conversations with a peer institution, and in our minds, we thought, okay, we're going to launch and share this with 20,000 students in the beginning. And once we had a conversation with another institution who had the same vendor, they quickly advised, start small, build up, and we appreciated their insights because they were speaking from their own personal experience, and so that really helped us quite a bit. So the relationships you establish in the beginning can help you as well once you've already selected your vendor. And at UCF, the other point I'll add to that is being flexible with the launch date. Unexpected internal and external factors will likely force you to delay the start date. For example, at UCF, Hurricane Dorian resulted in UCF being closed for an entire week during a peak period in the financial aid process. and around the same time we were planning on launching. We remained flexible. Obviously, that was out of any of our control. And so just keep that in mind as well as you're developing the launch date. But as you engage with vendors, knowing that they are experts in the solution, not on your campus. The learning should go both ways, and hopefully the vendor is expressing some curiosity but around your institution. But if not, making sure that you and your team discuss what are the key messages and things that a vendor will need to know about your organization and the students that you serve. This is especially beneficial at a point in the process where it's helpful to have students because they can for themselves speak to the experience of how this solution could potentially serve them and navigating through your institution. The last part seems pretty obvious, but taking thorough notes during the demonstrations is key, and staying organized. Again, identifying that, having that identified project manager to organize all of that was really helpful for UCF. Once you start scheduling a lot of vendor demonstrations back to back, the messages may start sounding very similar. So making sure that you log the vendor's answers to your questions, especially logging whenever a vendor is making a promise to you, capture that in notes, capture that in email so that you can circle back with the vendor and say, during our demonstration, you mentioned XYZ. I think that is especially helpful. Next slide. And I'm sure if you've engaged with any vendors for any solution, you've heard this at some point. It's on our roadmap. We heard this many times during our demonstrations for chatbots, and I would just say be wary of vendors' use of the word roadmap. It may not come to fruition and/or their timeline is unrealistic or doesn't match your timeline. So when they say that, ask for some more clarifying questions. We oftentimes heard it'll be available in Q4. What is Q4? So making sure that you have specifics as best as they're able to provide, because again, it just may not match your timeline, and that may be a big decision factor in which vendor you select. So after selecting your vendor, as I mentioned before, we had these conversations with other institutions. You may want to consider starting small. The bot's knowledge base / brain, it takes time to develop, and it is not student-facing ready right away. If you launch too soon, this is something that we were very fearful of, is we didn't want the students' interactions with the bot to be inaccurate and then decrease the students' confidence in the bot. So the smaller number that you start with, and the more that you can preface, say, hey, I'm still learning, help me learn. I'm a baby bot, let's learn together. Because the more interactions the bot has and the more times it gets it right, great. Also, the times it doesn't get it right, it's getting smarter along the way. So you may want to consider starting a small number and then scale up. Ultimately, the frontline staff are going to be the ones to hear from the students when they are happy or frustrated with the technology. So make sure that the staff within the department that the bot's going to live in are involved or at least kept up to date on the status of the project. If you're launching a new feature within the bot, make sure that your frontline staff knows about it, because they are likely going to be the ones that the students complain to or celebrate with. And so it'll be nice for them to be involved and to know. And ultimately, this is just going to help you identify additional areas for the bot to get smarter.
All right, and so again, going back to our focus of first student transfer students, right? What Mitzy mentioned in terms of the knowledge base, right? The brain of the chatbot, it takes a while to build up, but you also have the opportunity to create the questions and the answers that will be provided by the bot. Many vendors will come with a set of questions and answers that it's really up to you to just modify so that they're customized to your institution. Other times, you might be presented with that and the ability to add new questions. Every vendor will have a different package of what the knowledge base looks like. Of course, there's intellectual property involved in this. From what I've seen, the questions that are created by the campus, those are the property of the institution. But regardless, when you are building your knowledge base, you again have to be incredibly mindful of who's going to be the user, right? What is the student that is going to be attracted to the bot, or who we're going to market this to? What are the questions they're going to have? And what are the things that we need to keep in mind as we prepare the answers, right? And so one of the biggest thing is really to be wary of jargon that we are used to, but that for first generation incoming students, they have no clue what it means. I remember being an undergraduate student and having no clue what a registrar was. I had zero clue what a reimbursement was. We have to understand that what is common knowledge and common lingo to us is actually not very common for folks outside of the institution or new to the institution. So as you're building your knowledge base, keep in mind that when you provide answers, that you don't say something like, you can find more answers to your questions by visiting your dean of students. Is there a way that you can describe what a dean of students is? Is there a way to reword the answer so that it's a little bit more clear, and it's actually a teaching opportunity for the students that are asking these questions, right? So just be incredibly aware of that when you get to that stage. And of course, if your bot is at some point available to your student support system, may that be a parent, a family member, etc., you might want to consider multi-language abilities for your chatbot. I know that that is an ability or a feature that many vendors offer. So if you, as you're thinking about the purpose of your bot, who it's going to serve, especially if you're thinking about first generation students, depending on your region, making sure that your vendor has the ability to have a multi-language bot. Maybe you might not use it in the beginning, but maybe later on will be really helpful for your long-term planning, right? When you think about especially an admissions-based bot or a bot that is meant to guide entering students at the onset, right, at orientation. What are the questions they have, and who are they currently relying on? Usually parents and peers. So a bot can be very helpful in teaching the teacher, right, or teaching the peers who are going to be additional resources for information for your students.
Wonderful. So here's just an example of UCF's chatbot deployment timeline. I know I've referred to this in the presentation several times, but we started our process in January 2019, and we were finally able to deploy our web-based bot in August of 2019, and waited a few more months before we launched the SMS text bot. I hope that this just shows you in a visual way that it does take time from exploring to designing to implementing the solution. I could create a whole separate timeline on just the ongoing work that's involved, but especially for the audience, that's over 53% of you are in the process of thinking about implementing a chatbot on your campus, just knowing that it does take time, and we are here to help answer any questions that you may have about that process, but this is just an example of what it looked like for UCF. So at this, we want to turn it over to hear from you all in any way that we can, whether it's through the chat box, or Michael or Toya, if you all have any questions for us. But we'd love to hear from you. Are there any questions that our presentation sparked for you, or any questions that you came into today's presentation that we didn't cover that you'd like for us to share out? So I'll turn it over to the audience or to Latoya or Michael, and we'll go from there.
Sure. One question did come up, and that is kind of turning it inward towards faculty and staff. Do you have any examples of chatbots that have been used, say, for human resources navigation, or any other type of navigation that would be more apt to be those that are employed by the institution?
Yeah, so with Chatbot, it's actually a technology that is new to the institution in terms of student facing, but it's been around for quite a long time in other settings, right? Again, at the very core, a chatbot is meant to be a support, right? Scaffolding. It's meant to help you figure out where to go, how to find your answer. I am absolutely sure that there are examples out there of it being used, for HR purposes, for orienting your staff. I think in terms of orienting faculty, that would be a new application. I'm not quite sure. I can't speak to any specific goals that I think would be helpful for creating a bot for faculty, but I'm sure there are. But I think that, again, if the way to go about it from the way Mitzy and I view this is that you first identify what is the issue you're trying to address or trying to solve. And out of all of the tools that are at your disposal, does the bot make sense? And if it does, then go for it. Really, the application of it is limitless, but its success is highly dependent on what goal and what what things you want to solve for your particular population, whether that's a student or that's faculty or your employees.
And something I will add is that I have seen chatbots utilized with, for example, academic advisors may use it with students, right? Especially if the bot lives, for example, at UCF, it lives in financial aid. If you're meeting with a student and they have a question about an area that you may not have all the answers to, but a bot on your campus lives in that area, you may say, hey, let's go to the bot together and ask the bot this question, because chances are, if it's a specialized bot, the knowledge base already has that response or can direct the student and the staff member or faculty member to the right answer. So I have seen it utilized in that way in terms of when faculty and staff are supporting students, they may lean on the bot together and learn something together at the same time. So that's one way, but in terms of, like Cynthia mentioned, more internal facing, I haven't seen that utilized as much. It's been mostly focused and centered around students.
Thank you. Latoya, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So I'll chime in on two things. I think one of the takeaways I have from today's session, it's really that a bot is a part of your overall strategy, and it's only useful if it makes sense. In environments where there are less and less people but more and more students, a bot might make sense as a part of your overall communication, outreach, engagement strategy for information that's maybe repetitive or very straightforward. But for some of that more complex, one-to-one, very specific cases, it might not be as ideal. But that's where you have your human resource, right? Your talent, your advisor, your coach, or where they can really provide some of that insight. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think that's at least one of the big takeaways it seems like that we should get from today's session. But in terms of comments, I just wanted to share a little bit that there aren't very many questions, but I wanted to just share with you and a couple of folks, our colleagues down at FIU are using it in their one-stop program, which is a sort of a umbrella for admissions and financial aid. We also had another colleague that says that they're piloting it in the chemistry department at UCF. So maybe that might be an opportunity just to kind of, for the two groups at UCF, or the bot, everybody that has a bot, to kind of connect. A couple of other people have said that they know that there isn't one implemented in their department per se, but that they know that there are other areas on the campus that are using it. And it seems like a lot of it is around some of that engagement and informational types of things in terms of use on the campuses. And then in terms of just other, a couple of people have said, that they don't have a bot in their department or college, and they're not actually aware as to whether or not there is one on their campus, but they wanted to join today just to get some ideas and in ways that they could maybe engage the students at their college. And lastly, there's a bunch of thank yous today. It was really great. It made me think about bots in a different type of way. So with that was a summary of the comments and things that came in through the chat. So I'll pass it back to Michael to close us out.
Sure. Any closing comments, Cynthia or Mitzy?
Oh, I mean, thank you so much for putting this together. I know we had a little bit of difficulty on the tech side in the beginning, but it has been a really enjoyable experience for both Mitzy and I. And if you have any questions regarding, launching of a bot, thinking through who the player should be or how it could be applied, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to field questions and have additional conversations. I think, we've learned from other folks when we were launching our own chatbots. And so we're happy to pay it forward and share what we know with you.
Exactly. And I think the one final note is, and that's really the spirit of all of this, is that collaboration is key, internally collaborating with your campus departments, but also across campuses. So when universities collaborate, more students win, and that's what we really believe, and we're just grateful for everyone's attention and time.